Hello everybody, this is Nahaz, and men lie, women lie, but stats don't lie. Welcome to episode 9. We're going to recap the StarLadder Invitational action from over this past weekend, and we'll talk about ESL One Manila, which is starting here in just a couple of days. So here's the bracket from SL Invitational. This was a really fun event. We started off, it was a double elimination bracket. All these series were best of 3 up into the grand finals, which was best of 5. We start off on day 1 with a pretty good series, actually, even though it was 2-0. Vegas Squadron really did give LGD a pretty tough time. The first game of this series was actually one of the more competitive games of the tournament right up until we got to the last couple days. Vega played pretty much an early game strategy. They executed pretty well. LGD were able to draw the game out. Game 2 was also very interesting. LGD showed off the Lifestealer, which is a pick that we had kind of heard about from the Chinese teams for a while, but hadn't really got to see in Tier 1 action. Aggressive played that hero, and it was really interesting. He pretty much hopped in an Ancient Creep and would run out in front of his team, and they had a couple of Blink Initiators behind him to sort of come in behind with that secondary initiation. It ended up being really powerful and sent Vega down to the lower bracket. The second game, Alliance pretty much dismantled Virtus Pro. S4 got his Queen of Pain in the first game, just absolutely went ham on the hero. Virtus Pro never really seriously threatened in either one of these matches. It was a little unusual that the drafts were almost identical from game 1 to game 2. G really struggled on his Zeus in both games. They were never able to get him going, and as we all know, VP very reliant on that mid laner making explosive plays. The third series was a little bit of an upset as Vici Gaming Reborn really looked quite a bit better than MVP Phoenix. These games were a lot less competitive than we were expecting. QO had one of the worst games I've seen from him on a Slark in the second game of this series when he was given a couple of early kills on Yang's Darkseer, including the first blood, and then fed a solo kill right before hitting level 6 on his Slark, and really just never looked comfortable in the game after that, as MVP Phoenix were knocked down. The last series of the day, crowd favorite certainly, was also really the most exciting as Na'Vi prevailed 2-1 over OG. This was less of an upset than it may have seemed. Na'Vi had been playing fairly well coming into the tournament. OG really tried something very different in this series. They ran Miracle on Sand King and on Puck twice. In particular, that third game on Puck was, I believe, the third lowest GPM of Miracle's career professionally at only 309. So that really didn't work out for them. The second day started with the lower bracket matches, had a pretty good series from Vega and Virtus Pro. This was one of the bigger best of 3 turnarounds I've seen recently, as Virtus Pro, continuing from the previous day, really looked rather hapless in the first game. Looked like they were just going to get swept out of the tournament 0-4, and then really came back with kind of a pocket push strat in game 2 behind a Chen, and really just dominated game 3 behind FNG's Broodmother. That was a hero that they picked up in the second phase. None of us were really sure if FNG could play that hero, and he just looked really good. I mean, they were winning a bunch of fights 4v5 while Brood was taking top and mid rack. So Virtus Pro really came back in that series. At the same time, Vega was kind of the hard luck loser of the tournament. They went home without winning a series. Really did actually play fairly well for saying that, so I do think they have something to build on coming out of this tournament. And MVP Phoenix, this was really the disappointment of the tournament. They go 0-4 in games at this tournament as they were eliminated fairly convincingly by OG. OG in this series really went back to what had made them so successful in the Frankfurt Majors, switching back and forth 1 and 2 position from Miracle to No-Tail. So in game 1, No-Tail played a Chaos Knight. They got a Wisp. They looked very, very good with him as the safe lane farmer. But then in game 2, they switched it up. No-Tail ran Brewmaster, that more initiating focused hero, whereas Miracle was put on the more hard farming Lone Druid. He actually played middle anyway with that hero, but I still think OG is at its best when No-Tail and Miracle, their roles are sort of flexible on the team between who's going to be the kind of initiator or do stuff hero and who's going to be the hard farmer. The lower brackets were the last 2 series of the day. LGD Alliance was really, really good. Alliance just kind of got caught in this series. They played some early game aggression strategy strategies, and LGD were just quite simply able to hold out. It was really interesting seeing what they were able to do. They looked like a very disciplined team. A lot of us were arguing before the tournament started. LGD had come into this tournament with only a 4-9 record in online matches with its current roster. A lot of us were discussing how much could you really learn from watching those matches, and as it turns out, the answer was not much. It was pretty obvious, especially given the level at which they showed at this LAN, that they were just kind of trying out strats, and their mid and late game decision making looked really, really good throughout the tournament. The evening series, Navi really sent Vici Gaming Reborn home pretty easily in this series. By sending them home, I mean they knocked them down to the lower bracket. But this was really Navi saying, "Hey, you know, we're gonna sustain this high level of play that you saw on the first day." Over the last weeks coming into this tournament, Navi had been playing well in Dream League, and some of the other event qualifiers. They'd shown fairly high levels of play at time, but they really hadn't shown that they could sustain that level of play from series to series. This was the series where Navi fans really started to get excited. Dendy played his Queen of Pain again. Looked really good, and it looked like the team just had a ton of momentum going into the third day. So in that third day, we started off with Vici Gaming Reborn against Virtus Pro. This was almost the opposite of the previous day for Virtus Pro. VP came out in game one, got G, his invoker, won that game fairly convincingly, looked like they might be moving on. All of a sudden, in game two, they really just got it completely turned around on him. G had pretty much one of the worst, if not the worst, invoker games I've seen him have at the pro level. VCR were able to just completely shut down Virtus Pro's aggression. And then in game three wasn't particularly close. Vici Gaming Reborn were able to win that one fairly convincingly. The Alliance OG series was really notable for its Manila Major Invite implications. One of these two teams definitely at risk of not making that 8-team direct invites list, and it did end up being Alliance. First two games, once again, were very, very competitive. Both teams were showing the form that they had in the previous day. Looked like this series was going to be close the whole way. Definitely was. Alliance was able to win game two behind Loda's Lifestealer. Looked like they had a ton of momentum. But then in game three, Alliance did something a little bit unusual. They picked up Wisp early, and they actually picked both the Tiny and the Chaos Knight, and really just looked like they didn't have the synergy going between those two heroes at all. Lost the early game, and the game really wasn't that competitive from there. Vici Gaming Reborn OG was held next, so OG had to turn around kind of on very short notice and play this series against Vici Reborn, and the first two games quite competitive. In fact, the first game was a little bit lopsided in OG's favor, where the second one was a little bit more lopsided in VGR's favor. The third match was very competitive, but it really was telling of Vici Gaming Reborn. Up until this point in the tournament, they had looked like a very talented team, which we all know they are, with ZYF at the carry position, but some of their decision making had been a little bit messy. This was the game where they really showed that they were really here to compete, because OG had a very good pressure strat. VGR played very, very disciplined behind ZYF Spectre. They were able to stretch the game out, and OG just weren't able to get quite enough done in order to secure the game, and VGR just took it late and won there. So that was a really interesting series. OG, unfortunately, and Alliance were both eliminated on that third day. I said prior to this tournament that I thought this was one of the hardest to handicap, hardest to predict fields I've ever seen in Pro Dota, and again, our finalists were going to be kind of a surprise. The last series of the night, this was the third day in a row that Navi had closed out the evening to the delight of the home crowd. Navi really, really looked good in this series. The first game of this series was one of the better Pro Dota 2 matches I had seen in quite some time, but Navi really took over the second game, again, behind standout performances from Dendy and General. They ran Dit Yara, I believe, in this series on a safe lane Nature's Prophet. That looked very convincing for them in terms of their ability to apply pressure around the map. And the second game of the series was the fastest game of the tournament by 10 minutes, as they ran a Rao strat, and they won the game in 14 minutes. Ditya Ra in this series, in that particular game, set all-time Pro Dota 2 records on Nature's Prophet for assists per minute and hero damage inflicted per minute. Again, that's pretty remarkable. That hero has several thousand games played. He's one of the top 3 most picked heroes ever in Pro Dota 2, and really that game was one of the more dominant Furion performances that we've ever seen. And then on to the last day, we had the losers bracket finals between LGD and Vici Gaming Reborn. I gave LGD a fairly decisive edge in this series, but it was really ZYF's carry play that was just absolutely outstanding, able to carry them past LGD. The drafts for LGD were a little bit strange in this series. Their game 2 draft was a little weak, and then game 3, I thought they made some really suspect decisions. They ended up putting maybe mid on a Sand King against a Broodmother pick. They picked the Sand King last to counter the Broodmother. They didn't even end up putting the 2 1v1 in lane, so Sand King ended up 1v1 against a Queen of Pain. It actually ended up winning that lane because LGD were playing maybe against a stand-in for Vici Gaming Reborn. This was what made the weekend all remarkable, was that Vici Gaming Reborn had been playing with their coach Mikasa as a stand-in for Nono, who wasn't able to secure a visa to get into Kiev. So that lane actually was won by the Sand King against the Queen of Pain, but the FY roaming Enchantress, as it had all weekend long, just absolutely ruined LGD in that game, and they were able to come out on top. And the grand finals were really, really good. The first game of this grand final best of 5, if you didn't catch any of the action from over the weekend, you haven't seen these matches, that probably was the best Pro Dota 2 game I've seen all of 2016. It will almost certainly be in the top 5 matches of this year. So if you haven't watched that, please go download that VOD. It was an amazing, amazing match. Ended up with a Divine Rapier pickup that Na'Vi were able to dramatically secure. It was a really, really neat game. But then for the next 3 games, Vici Gaming Reborn, they really put Na'Vi outside of their comfort zone. Na'Vi had what I thought were some suboptimal drafts. They had an Oracle pick that I really questioned that didn't work out for them. But at the end of the day, Na'Vi were trying to run this early game pressure that had made them successful all tournament long, and Vici Gaming Reborn really looked like they had the answers. They played some very disciplined Dota. FY was just an outstanding drafter in this tournament, and VGR, despite being a new team, all right, not too long playing together, they did look like veterans at this event. The meta was very, very interesting at this tournament. So there were actually 38 different heroes that were picked at least 4 times in 38 games. So 38 different heroes that appeared in 10% or more of the matches. And 24 heroes were picked and banned in at least 50% of the matches. So there was a little bit of concentration at the top of the hero pool, but there was still a nice variety in terms of the 5v5 matches that we were seeing. Only 3 heroes were picked or banned in more than 28 of 38 matches. So this is the thing. I had a number of people on Reddit. I said over the weekend that I actually thought 6.86 was in a pretty good place. Yes, Invoker is pretty broken. Beastmaster and Enchantress probably in need of maybe mild nerfs, and Omni Knight in pubs as well looks to be pretty OP in a lot of situations. Other than that, I do think we're in a pretty good place balance-wise. There are some tweaks that could be done to a number of individual heroes, but in terms of the number of viable strats that we're seeing, in terms of the diversity in lineups that we're seeing, I actually think the metagame is in a pretty good place. And I was about to say, I had some people on Reddit come back at me and say, no, there are like 6, 8, 10 heroes that are really OP. We're seeing them too much. To me, it's fine. If you want to make a case, though, that there are half a dozen to 10 truly overpowered heroes, you've got to explain to me why at least 3 to 7 of them made it through 10 out of 38 drafts completely untouched, neither picked or banned. To me, the meta has become a lot more refined. And this is another thing that came up in some of the draft analysis discussions. A lot of people were saying, well, no, that's not the right hero, or that's not the right analysis. Guys, we're moving toward a place in Pro Dota right now where the right pick is very, very team dependent. It's not just a matter of, okay, you have these 3 heroes, I have these 3 heroes, I'm going to pick my 4th pick to counter your 3 and synergize with my 3. It really is a matter of what a particular team is comfortable playing and what they feel their particular set of players can play at a high level. I remember, the analogy that I'll use, it's like if you watch Major League Baseball and you watch defenses, there's not one optimal position that you put your shortstop or that you put your center fielder or right fielder. They're constantly moving around. They're constantly adjusting their position based on the particular pitcher and the particular hitter that they're facing and their tendencies and preferences for where the ball is going to end up being put in play. I really see the same thing happening in picks at the top of the metagame. Teams have very different drafting styles. There's no one defining way that you have to play this patch. There's a lot of room for teams to experiment. I think you're going to see that at ESL One Manila this week. I think you're going to see that continuing into the Manila Major. Invoker, like I said, the only hero that was banned in over 50% of matches. He's really the only hero right now that I think you can say definitely needs a moderate, I'm an Invoker player, so I'm going to understate things a little bit, a moderate nerf. Beastmaster and Enchantress, 92% pick ban rate, and they were almost exclusively picked and banned in the first phase. So you can definitely make an argument there. But again, I think you have to be very careful. Anytime you're talking about nerfing or buffing individual heroes, you have to be aware that you're shooting at a moving target. A month and a half ago, a lot of people were probably arguing that Outworld Devourer needed a moderate to substantial nerf. He was barely touched this entire tournament, and he's been getting crushed recently in a lot of pro matches that I've seen. So you really have to be careful. The minute you start to say, oh, well, Beastmaster's overpowered, Enchantress is overpowered, I do think Enchantress is really problematic right now in terms of what she brings to the table. Beastmaster, though, I do think teams are going to learn to adjust. Teams are going to learn to play against that, just like they've learned to play against Lone Druid and Outworld Devourer and a couple other heroes already this patch. So I think you do have to be pretty careful with that. It was notable to me that Sven, Death Prophet, and Bounty Hunter were all banned 15 or more times and picked less than 10. I think this was really an artifact of the teams involved. Throughout most of the tournament, teams had actually been banning Sven first phase against Vici Gaming Reborn. Wasn't until that FY, Enchantress, and Bounty Hunter really started wreaking havoc, and they also started having a lot of success with their offlaner Yang on the Beastmaster and Doom, that teams started really to ban those heroes against them. And Beastmaster in particular, they were running a greedy Iron Talon jungling Beastmaster for FY in a number of matches. He was getting level 6 consistently at the 6.5 minute mark, regardless of camps. That was really when teams started to look and say, we've got to ban that Beastmaster, at least against this team. And I think you'll see that continue. Iron Talon, an item that I think could use a little bit of a tone down anyway. So if we do get a little balance patch before Manila, look for that to be changed. Interestingly, Nature's Prophet started 2-7 at this tournament. He was run predominantly as an offlaner, had a lot more success in the safe lane. OG ran No Tail on him a couple of times. Navi ran Dit-Ura on him in the safe lane multiple times. Was 4-1 as a safe laner. Finished the tournament 2-9 as an offlaner. Really, as an offlaner, just didn't provide the kind of initiation potential that we were seeing out of a Beastmaster or out of a Darkseer. The Queen of Pain had a real interesting turnaround in this tournament. She had been 7-22 from the end of the Shanghai Major to the beginning of this event. She actually went 11-3 in this tournament, and that was something that Vici Gaming Reborn, they put Mikasa, their stand-in, on this hero to give him that mobility advantage. He was pretty regularly, despite most of the time falling behind in the laning phase, he was pretty regularly able to contribute on this hero. And this is another thing that I think typifies just what a good place the Pro Dota 2 scene is at right now. It really is not all about just getting that laning phase advantage. For the last couple of patches, we've seen your EGs, we've seen your secrets really beat teams mostly on resource accumulation. This isn't to take anything away from those individual players and the style of Dota that those teams played, but you just see those teams in particular just consistently get off to these massive laning phase leads. This was, of course, those teams were not at this tournament. I think it's a mistake to focus on that that. Some very high-level Dota was played anyway. But what you saw in this tournament is teams were able to come back from that early laning phase disadvantage by good mid-game decision-making and good late-game strategic execution. And this is something I myself have been very critical of, these kind of rubber band bounties. I still think that they're problematic in many respects. I still think, we're seeing 1.5K gold bounties for kills at like 25 minutes, which I think is really, really bad. At the same time, there is an argument for these, and I think that that's largely it, that teams are able to come back from laning phase deficits, makes the mid-game more interesting, adds that extra element of tension to those late-game conflicts. Interestingly, I've been saying this also for a while now. I really believe it's your 3 and 4 position play and your captaining that is winning your tournaments nowadays, much more so than your 1 and 2 position play, as has been the case in the past. And if you really looked at the drafts from this tournament, offlaners and supports, particularly 4 position supports, really dominated the first phase of most of these drafts. The way the meta is right now, the fact that a lot of these top 3 and 4 position heroes can be run more or less interchangeably as either offlaners or sort of greedy Iron Talon junglers, I think that it lends sort of an extra element of depth and makes those heroes really hotly contested. I do think the mid meta and the 5 position support meta have stagnated a bit. What's happened in the last couple of patches is that you've seen the jungle get nerfed pretty heavily. You'd seen stacks in the jungle are hard to burst down with AoE spells, which was designed to combat this spam stacking meta, the Storm Spirit Leshrac era. As a result, though, what's happened between Creep Golden XP being nerfed, pole camps being nerfed, and then the nerf to AoE stack farming, what you've seen is that supports basically have to rotate. There's almost constant support rotation nowadays. You rarely see static lanes, or rarely, probably in only about a third or less of pro matches do you actually see truly static lanes, as we've seen the try-v-try setups in some patches of the past. And what this has done is mid is now the most vulnerable lane, and it's been that way for a while now, but I think it's becoming more and more true as you're watching high-level Dota. Mid is very vulnerable, and what this has done is it's made the mid lane less kind of about those 1v1 mechanics and more about map sense, more about teams structuring their early rotations around their lineups. And these aren't bad things, but I think it's gone almost too far away from some of those classic 1v1 skill battles that we all like to see. So one of the things that I'd like to see maybe happen in a small balance patch, if one indeed comes out before Manila, I'd like to see maybe a little bit of a buff to tri lanes again, because I think if there's one, we've brought back split pushing, we've brought back not necessarily the death ball, but we brought back early 5-game pressure. Those strategies are now just as viable as the team fight heavy style that we saw played in the previous patch. I think this is a good thing for the game. One thing that we barely see at all anymore is tri lanes. And I don't want to see try versus try every match like we did a couple of patches ago, but I think that tri-lane execution was an interesting part of the game, and I'd like to see some minor buffs maybe to the way creep XP is split, maybe some adjustments to the pull camps again to try and make it at least a viable strategy in a few more situations. Again, I don't want to see it every game, but it's a pendulum effect where I think we may have moved a little bit too far in one direction. So my players of the tournament, obviously both are going to be Vici Gaming Reborn. This is a great story, guys. ZYF is a player that people had talked about on the Chinese scene for quite some time. He had opportunities, he had played and had some success on tier 2 teams, never really had that breakout performance that a lot of people expected of him with a tier 1 team. Guys, this was a breakout performance, and I know y'all are going to say Liquid wasn't there, Secret wasn't there, EG wasn't there. The level of Dota that this guy played over the weekend is such that he could have competed against those top teams. He had 634 average GPM. The next highest was 564. That was Dit Yara from Na'Vi, who himself played outstandingly well. There were 7 games in this tournament where 700 gold per minute or more were achieved. I'm sorry, there were 9 games total in this tournament where 700 or more GPM was achieved, and he had 7 of them, including 4 out of the final 6 games for his team to win the tournament. So, I mean, this guy was insanely clutch. Again, 10.4, 3.0, 12.8 average kills, death, assists, top kill total, second fewest average deaths, and still in the top 10 for that assist total. Absolutely magnificent Dota. We saw just a great performances on Gyro, Sven, and Spectre, as we'd seen in the team's online matches, but really achieved consistent excellence at the carry position at this event. And then the real story to me is FY. A lot of kind of eyebrows raised a while ago when Vici Gaming Reborn announced their rosters for this upcoming season. FY, a lot of people were saying he had been kicked off the Vici Gaming main squad. Now the reports have surfaced in recent weeks that he actually left the team voluntarily. He wanted to handpick a roster. He wanted to assemble a group around his leadership that he really felt like he could work with and he felt like he could direct. And this was just a masterful display of both drafting and leadership from him. Picked 44 different heroes in 17 games. There were only 4 heroes that they used in 50% or more of their games. And Brood, Beastmaster, Invoker, and Sven are the only heroes that they banned 10 plus times out of 17 games. So they had a very good sense of how to tailor their bans and their picks to the opponent's strategies. And of course, in terms of gameplay, he was extraordinarily active around the map as his Enchantress. Basically won a couple of games almost single-handedly with his Bounty Hunter play in the early game against OG in particular. In the first game of that series, they 5th picked the Bounty Hunter. All of us, including the analyst desk, sort of forgot that hero was still in the pool, and he just absolutely ruined OG with that hero. And then I believe it was the 3rd game of the grand finals against Na'Vi, picked that against Navi's Oracle, just got amazing trades, really, killed the courier, pretty much ruined Dendy's game mid. It was just an insane performance. So from both a play and a drafting perspective, I thought he was outstanding. Zhao 8 had a really excellent weekend in terms of his drafts, but there were times when his gameplay showed a little bit of rust, in particular in that deciding series against Vici Gaming Reborn. He looked at a severe technical advantage when you compared him to what Yang, Vici Gaming Reborn's offlaner, was able to do. And Yang, a player, by the way, that I think if you're into Chinese Dota, you should really keep an eye on. I expect him to grow and get a lot better, and he was already very, very good at this event. So the Manila Invites picture, I spent some time talking about this on the panel. I really still believe, despite going 0-4 in this tournament, that MVP Phoenix is right up there with Secret, EG, and Liquid in terms of locks. Now, obviously, it's important when we talk about these invite scenarios. This is about what teams have on their resume. It's not necessarily about if Team X played Team Y right now, who do you think would win? I'm talking about what's on MVP Phoenix's resume. They were a top 4 team at Shanghai. They won one of only 3 international LAN events, that being Dota Pit, StarLadder Invitational, and this week's ESL One Manila, that were held between the end of Shanghai and Manila Invites going out. I really think you just can't ignore what is on that team's resume. They are absolutely a lock, and I will shout from the rooftops if anybody claims that they should not be included. I think that regardless of what you think about their current slump, are they a top 4 team in the world right now? Probably not, but I think you have to award teams for their achievements. You can't just look at, well, who do you think is the best right now? Because that's always going to be subjective. Vici Gaming Reborn, I really strongly feel that with this performance at StarLadder Invitational, that Vici Gaming Reborn have put themselves at the very least in contention for a bid, and I think they're probably 75-80% certain to get one. I love what we saw from this team in terms of their level of play. ZYF and Yang and FY were as technically skilled players as you saw at the tournament. DDC was incredibly steady on his Lion play. The only sort of wild card is that they did play with their coach Mikasa as a stand-in. Now, that wasn't their fault. It was an unavoidable visa situation that led to that. But that's the only question, is how are Ice Frog and the Dota 2 team going to weight the fact that they did this with a stand-in, and that obviously the team will want to go to the major with their normal roster, with their usual no-no at the mid position. So that's kind of the only question mark for me. If not for that, I would say that they're like 90% in, about the same level as MVP Phoenix, but I really do think that's a little bit of a wild card in terms of how the committee will consider that. So for the rest of the teams, I'm going to point out that on this slide, all 8 teams that are in action at ESL One Manila are in this discussion. LGD, as I used the wrong version of the file. Sorry about that. My face is cutting off the LGD logo. That's actually probably pretty appropriate. LGD, I think, is a very, very big long shot in terms of their consideration. They did play some very good games over the weekend, and so there is a maybe 5% chance that they might be invited based on potential, given that Zhao 8 has rejoined the roster and the team looked pretty good. I really consider that extremely unlikely. I'd actually, in the most recent version of the slides, I'd actually cut them out, so that's why you see the team logo getting overwritten by my face. But I do think LGD deserves to be mentioned, although not really a huge possibility. What I am thinking right now is that if the 8 invites went out today, that it would be Alliance that would get left off. It would be the locks and the 4 contenders except for Alliance. OG bumping them off, moving ahead of them by virtue of that head-to-head win at the StarLadder Invitational. However, I do think Alliance still has a very realistic chance to make it to Manila. The thing you have to understand is they no longer control their own fate. They're not playing at ESL One Manila, and I expect invites to come out right after that tournament. What needs to happen? Complexity and Fnatic are really, they're kind of trying not to play themselves out at ESL One Manila. These two teams need to make it out of the group phases. They need to at least look pretty good in doing so. If they do that, I think they're safe. There were top 6 finishers at the previous major. As long as they look at least decent at this LAN, they're going to be very, very strong contenders. Really, what Alliance needs to happen is for one of those teams to kind of flame out and the other one to win the whole tournament. Because if that happens, or really, I should say this, what Alliance needs to happen is for one of Complexity or Fnatic to get eliminated in the group stages, and then one of the 3 remaining teams that will already likely be in, so Secret, Liquid, and the other of Complexity or Fnatic, to win the tournament. If that happens, I think the one of Complexity or Fnatic that got bounced out that looks really bad this week in Manila, Alliance takes their spot, and that's your roster. In fact, I have this kind of feeling, given the way that the groups look, that team might be Fnatic, that Fnatic might struggle a little bit. We'll talk about that on the next slide. And if that happens, if Complexity makes it out of the groups, Fnatic struggles, and then one of Secret, Liquid, or Complexity end up winning the tournament, I think Alliance still does have that bid for Manila. In terms of the wild cards, really the 4 other teams, including eHome, probably need to win the whole tournament in order to be considered. I said at the StarLadder Invitational, I thought LGD, if they made the grand finals, would play their way onto this slide as a contender, as one of those teams that really had a, at least 30% chance of making it. I no longer think that. They were eliminated in the losers bracket finals pretty convincingly by Vici Gaming Reborn. eHome may be in that same kind of discussion, so they may be a notch ahead of the other 3 teams that are competing at this week's ESL event. I think if they do make it to the grand finals and they lose in a close series against, say, a Secret or a Liquid, that they might end up taking that last spot over Alliance. But again, I think they need to at least make the grand finals or even win the event outright to feel safe when those invites come out. And really, Wings, Empire, and Mineski, all those teams have the ability to play well at this event, but I think any of the three of them would need to win the tournament outright in order to secure a bid. So talking a little bit more specifically about ESL One Manila, here are the two groups that you're going to see in action starting later this week. This is going to be an absolutely outstanding event. A number of my good friends are going to be over there. I know Gods is making the short turnaround. He was with us at StarLadder this previous weekend. He's going to be flying right back out to Manila. It's going to be a lot of fun. And by the way, he absolutely deserves to be there. This guy has been one of the stalwart supporters of SEA Dota for a very long time. The one thing that you notice very quickly on this slide is that Group B is kind of the group of death. Secret, Fnatic, and eHome, all really among teams that were either favorites going into Shanghai and or actually performed well at the event. So, eHome probably the number one choice to win Shanghai before the major started. Secret, the team that actually won. Fnatic, a team that really surprised a lot of people, looked excellently coached, and finished in the top 6. Empire definitely has their work cut out for them in the group phase. Group A, I think a little bit more clear-cut. Wings is a team that I think has the potential to surprise people. They're a team that if you're not prepared for what they do can really catch you off guard. But Liquid and Complexity, the two teams that I do think will come out of this group, they are two of the teams that tend to be very, very prepared. Their level of preparation in terms of looking at what the opponent does, I think is really a notch ahead of most other teams you could name on the scene. So I don't think they're going to get caught off guard. So at the end of the day, I think Liquid and Complexity will come out of Group A, and Secret and eHome will come out of Group B. So Fnatic is the team, to me, that is really at risk in this tournament. They're going to be playing without Mushi. He has had some asthma-related issues since Shanghai. The team announced fairly recently that he was not going to be making the trip to this tournament. They're going to be playing with a stand-in in his stead. We're not sure what that's going to mean for their positions. Fnatic has been very, very good recently in online matches. They're actually 33-4 since Shanghai. They beat MVP Phoenix in a couple series very convincingly. But the more I go to these events, the more I watch the games. LAN competition is even group phases, LAN competition is a very different animal. LAN competition rewards teams that can make adjustments both within and between series. We talked about how Virtus Pro was able to really turn it around in their series on the second day against Vega. We talk about how Vici Gaming Reborn, after they got absolutely dumpstered by Na'Vi on the second day of the event, were really able to make the adjustments, limit the extent to which teams were going to be able to exploit the fact that they had a stand-in playing in their mid lane position. I really question with Fnatic whether they're going to have that kind of strategic resilience without Mushi on the team. I give all the credit in the world to Kenshi and to Extinct, who did coaching and analysis for the team at Shanghai. Fnatic went from a team that I thought their drafts made absolutely no sense 3 or 4 weeks before the major to a team that looked like they had studied their opponents and were really on top of the meta at the actual event. I just question whether they're going to be able to continue that without their most veteran player on the roster. So I do think that they're going to fall in the group stage against Secret and eHome. Really, it's very unfortunate for them that they got such a tough group draw, but that's just what I see happening. And then from the group stages, which are played in a GSL format, so you need to win 2 series to advance. You lose 2 series before you win 2, you go home. The 4 remaining teams, top 2 in each group, are seeded into what I understand anyway is a single elimination playoff bracket. You guys can double check that for me, and if that's wrong, I'll correct it in the video comments. I believe it's the same format as we saw last summer at the MLG Austin event at the X Games, and based on that, I think you're going to see Secret, Liquid, and eHome in that order. I was actually very tempted to pick Liquid here. I think Liquid is they're a team that I really like because they come into every game, they come into every tournament just very consistently prepared. You very rarely, if ever, see this Liquid squad take a game off. But Secret, they're playing with this new roster. I think Secret's going to have a little bit of extra motivation to try and sort of get some momentum going here ahead of the Manila Major. I debated this for a long time because Puppy, more so than any other captain this side of PPD, is a guy that will save strats, and Secret is safely in the field at Manila, so there's always the possibility that you might see particularly Secret and Liquid doing a little bit of strat saving. I still think talent-wise, in terms of the level of play that they showed at Shanghai, these teams are reasonable picks. And again, I wouldn't be surprised to see Liquid win the whole thing. I would not be surprised, based on what we saw from Vici Gaming Reborn, to see eHome win the whole thing. And you know what? Fnatic fans, if that team achieves in this tournament, guys, nobody will be happier than me. I know in a couple of these last two videos, I probably seem to you guys like I'm dumping on Fnatic. I am sorry for that. I've got to call them like I see them. I actually really love this Fnatic team. I rooted for them at Shanghai. I have said multiple times on panels that Mushi belongs on the Mount Rushmore of Pro Dota 2, up there alongside Puppy, Dendy, and Burning, maybe a couple other names, Fear, but I don't know that this team is in a position to have success at this particular event, particularly with Mushi on the sidelines. But anyway, I think this is going to be just an absolutely tremendous event. It's going to start this Friday. Please do tune in and watch those matches. Support all my friends that are going to be working in Manila. I'll be here cheering from the sidelines, and I will talk to you soon.